That's actually the idea of agile threat modeling. So to have something that tries to bridge the gap between classic threat modeling, which is very human and workshop intensive, and that's still very useful. So you always have some kind of threats that no tool can ever identify, but it's not feasible to have this classic threat modeling workshop happening on every sprint. So that means to have some kind of baseline agile threat modeling that can be used to try to bridge that gap. That's the idea. Well, and that's exactly what Threagile is about. That's an, if you want to name it like that, an agile threat modeling toolkit, something around that. It's a good definition. Threagile, that's open source on GitHub and Docker Hub. I created that last year, and it's released under the MIT license, so very permissive open source license. And that's doing exactly that. So you model the classic threat modeling things in a YAML file, including the data assets, the technical components, as well as connections and trust boundaries. And the tool does analyze that as a graph of connected components and has some risk rules built in that can also be extended to derive those aforementioned things like the model graphs, potential risks, mitigation recommendations, and stuff out of that. So with Threagile, you are modeling in a technology-aware style. So it's more on the detailed side of modeling in terms of defining what, for example, for a communication link, what protocol is being used, or for a component, what type of component is that, technically speaking, web server, message queue, database, stuff like that. And there are over 40-ish risk rules continually growing. That's checking those model elements, the model graph for those risks or these potential threats. You have, of course, a custom risk rule plugin interface that you can extend the risk rule set with your own custom rules if you want. Some more values are being calculated, more on that later in a few slides. There are also model macros existing. That's something like to try to have some automated model modification via a wizard style question back and forth to read in an existing model file and then modify it in a certain style, like adding build pipeline or like adding identity provider stuff and something like that by asking the modeling user some kind of questions and then emitting a modified YAML file as well. So, and the risk, that's very important, the risk mitigation state is also kept in that very same model. So you need to check off certain risks that you've implemented the mentioned or recommended mitigation steps, or that you're flagging it as an accepted risks, that you say you're just carrying that, not a problem, and or that you're just in the process of checking what you're going to do. So you can have those state also be tracked in that model file to reflect a updated version in the report as well, before and after mitigation state applied. It's released, of course.
And Christian, just a quick question, right? And all this data is stored in Git and version control using Git, right?
It's, yeah, as you like. So it's a text file, YAML file that you can use any kind of version control to version on that. That's definitely useful so that it evolves with the project. And when you're rolling back to another previous state, like reverting something, then the model is reverted along. So it really pays off to keep that checked in the source tree as well. Yeah, good one.
Because your raw data is stored in JSON, right?
It's YAML. So it's actually YAML.
Yeah, so YAML, yes, YAML, of course.
Close to that.
I think that's a massive advantage, right? You know, also, I'm not sure if you looked at, have you looked how you can reasonably easy get the history of files, you know, when you're consuming, so you can access the Git database directly, right? So you can actually think that Git also gives you the historical, because one of the things I always find that I think is also important is not necessarily, let's say, the first threat model, is the diff between the first and the second and the third, and the fourth and the fifth, right? So, you know, I think, again, you know, starting to think of that diff as a first-class citizen, right, which you get by saying, can I get the difference between, you know, this commit and that commit, right, or even do versions. Right now, we now do a lot of good version control using Git with different branches, and we auto tag things, so we get an ID for each one. It'll be quite amazing to see. And by the way, here is the threat model, the diff, or if the new one, but here's a diff, because ultimately, you know, changing threat model changes the risk profile of the application, right?
Absolutely correct. And you can also recreate the previous output of those created artifacts by just running Threagile on the previous version. You even have two visual diagrams and two reports and two risk charts and stuff like that. So that's definitely a very good point and a useful thing. And that's coming from the fact that you're maintaining the state in the same file. So actually that's pretty useful. Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Very cool question. Good. Yeah, as said, it's released as open source, MIT license, very permissive license, and also, of course, runs totally offline. Definitely.